declarations of interest? No, thank you. So we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have any changes or suggestions for the minutes? Excellent. This is going very well. I would like to move on to item number 5, which is Chair's business. I'll wait for Jeff and Mark to take their seats. It's okay, no problem. Just to give you the opportunity if anybody has any declarations of interest again. Okay, thank you. Okay, Chair's business.
Not really a declaration of interest, but as you know, and just for the record, I was a member or an observer to the Shareholder Advisory Group until May of last year.
Okay, thank you. And on that matter, I should also declare that I am an observer of the Shareholder Group since being appointed chair of OSM. Okay, Chair's business. I have just one brief thing to mention. A major part of today's OSM meeting is, as I've mentioned earlier, to review and scrutinise the draft business plans of Bristol City Council's arm's length companies. As it stands, these consist of the following: Bristol Holding Company, Bristol Waste Limited, Gorham Homes Limited, and Bristol Heat Networks Limited. It would be apparent to council colleagues and members of the public alike that the draft business plan for Bristol Heat Networks is not available for scrutiny alongside the other business plans, as this is subject to ongoing work, the outcome of which will feed into the City Leap procurement process, which is still live and subject to some commercial confidentiality. To avoid speculation, I therefore wanted to take this opportunity as chair to state that I have received clear assurances that there will be an opportunity for OSM to be updated on City Leap and related Heat Network matters in Exempt Session ahead of April Cabinet, where it is anticipated that the preferred bidder for City Leap will be confirmed. This is likely to be at our next OSM meeting, provisionally scheduled for late March. Before I move on, Brenda, can I just check if you have any declarations of interest? Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to the Mayor's forward plan, which I believe, Lucy, you are going to cover.
Yes, this item's just for noting, actually, Chair. So unless members have any queries, we can move on.
Okay, thank you. Minutes from the WECA Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is a standing item for information. Don't know if we have any comments on that. Excellent. Work programme for information. Is there anything anybody wanted to raise regarding the work programme? And we now move on to public forum. We have one statement from public forum, which is by Clive Stevens. Clive is not available, but we have copies of his statement and it has been noted. That brings us to the main body of the meeting, which is the scrutiny of the business plans. The way this is going to work, I believe members have been distributed an outline of how we're going to approach this. The first part will be an item, a presentation, which I believe Chris Holm is going to be presenting for us. We'll then look at each of the 3 business plans. We will have a comfort break at 7 o'clock. For each business plan, we're looking at a total of about 45 minutes, which will include a good 30 minutes for questions. What I will say is, as I said in the previous meeting, I will go around members, and what I'll ask you to do is to limit yourself to 2 questions at a time. You will get an opportunity to add further questions afterwards, but I want to give each and every one of you the opportunity to ask questions. At the end of the presentations, we will go into exempt session, at which point members of the press and members of the public will be asked to leave. That looks like it's going to be very easy to accomplish. We will then discuss the exempt session, and then towards the end of the meeting, OSM members alone will discuss their conclusions. So members of the representatives of the companies are welcome to leave at that point. In fact, we would actually encourage you to do so. With that in mind, I would like to hand over to Chris Holm. Chris, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Director, that's better, of Bristol Holding. I haven't actually got a presentation for you, but I'm just doing the introduction on behalf of Helen Davis, who unfortunately can't be here tonight. Really just to introduce the structure of how we intend to go through the process. So we'll be looking at, you've got 3 business plans in front of you, that for Bristol Waste, Gorham Homes and Bristol Holding itself. We intend to go through each in order to give you the sufficient time to ask any questions that you have on each of those. And what we will do is Stephen Peacock, as Executive Director, will just do a quick strategic client introduction for both BWC and Gorham. And then I will do a holdco summary for each of those. Then, with regards to Bristol Waste, Tony Lawless and Adam Henshaw, as the MD and FD respectively, will provide you with a short presentation. Similarly with Gorham, Stephen Baker and Chris Arnold will also provide you with a brief presentation. Again, you'll get the opportunity then to ask any questions. And with regards to the Bristol Holding, Peter Biange, as the chair of Holdco, will briefly introduce the Holdco business plan, and I will then do a follow-up and answer any questions on that particular area. So, with no further ado, unless anybody's got any questions on that, I'll pass over to Stephen Peacock to go through a brief introduction on Bristol Waste. Thank you.
Can I just check, Stephen, you wanted to do a quick 2 minutes before that, didn't you?
I was, thank you, Chair. Yes, I thought perhaps before starting I just would give OSM members and yourself a quick update on the role of the strategic client, just because it can be slightly confusing. And there have been some changes over the last 12 months. What we've tried to do is to strengthen, formalise and sort of structure in a slightly more formal way the role of the strategic client. And what that means, and that in effect is my role in this, is to ensure that the strategic goals of the companies themselves are aligned in such a way as they actually meet the objectives of the council as the client. So, you know, the outcomes that we are effectively procuring or buying from the companies. So as such, my job is really to support the relevant cabinet portfolio holder, such as the cabinet member for waste or energy, as it were, making sure that the companies perform in those roles to meet the needs of the administration, as distinct from the shareholder, as in the owner of the company, who obviously looks after not only the strategic performance of the company, but its actual health. So I'm here to represent the client and what we get from the companies. So just wanted to make that point because there have been some significant changes, and I think you'll hear later on some of the improvements that's created in the companies themselves and their business plans. So I can pause there or carry on to my quick intro to Bristol Waste.
Let me just check if there's any questions or... Councillor Fodor.
Thanks very much. That's helpful to clarify, so that really is useful. I do feel there's sometimes a tension between the council's role as client, and you're describing the strategic client role. Then there's the sort of service client, but there's also the shareholder role. Are we going to hear from the shareholder as well? Because there is a potential tension between the needs of the shareholder and the objectives of the shareholder and the needs of the client and the service clients.
Well, effectively, that's all of us in the room tonight, and that's why it's a rounded view. So you hear from the Bristol Holdings, which effectively is there on behalf of the shareholder. They'll talk to you about the health of the company. You've got the companies themselves, and you've got me representing the user of the service, and all the services that in effect rely on the companies fall within my area of the council. So the teams that in effect are the clients ultimately report into me. So it's the idea is sort of closing the loop on it all with everybody here in one place.
Thank you. Just to clarify though, the scrutiny of the service delivery and the client functions for those services is not happening here though. It's happening in other commissions. Absolutely. Yeah. So there is that separation that we're interested in community scrutiny. How well is waste getting dealt with, recycling getting dealt with, improving? So, but here we're going to be hearing perhaps a slightly different story in terms of the strategic role.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I don't think there is that differentiation. I mean, the strategic client is part of a whole. I think that's the point Stephen's trying to make. At the end of the day, you know, a key reason why the council has established the arm's length company is to manage and improve service delivery in those areas. What Stephen is describing is that the recent reviews of governance have actually demonstrated that probably the single biggest improvement we needed to make was to strengthen the role of the strategic client within the council's overall management of the company. So, as Stephen has described, the much greater presence from Stephen in those discussions with our companies is one of the things that's helped drive real improvement, which you'll particularly hear from Tony and colleagues with regard to Bristol Waste. So I personally wouldn't want to see it described as a tension between two competing parts of the council. This is about making sure that overall we're bringing all the interests that the council has in its companies to bear in a balanced and well-managed way, and hopefully you'll start to get a feel of that this evening.
And shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, and just to build on that, I mean, what we're talking about now, of course, is the business plan. The Bristol Waste business plan has been developed very, very closely. We've spent lots of time working together, and also with the cabinet member, so that the cabinet member for waste and the cabinet member, in effect, representing the shareholder, are all effectively aligned in what Bristol Waste is delivering for the council. So this process has really come to life over the last 3 months as we've been finalising the business plan. So the high level objectives, I won't go into detail. Tony's going to speak to some of those. You have the plan. But those high level strategic objectives for Bristol Waste were set by the client and agreed with the client. So that in effect at the top of the process is where the alignment happens. The cabinet member and through me articulates what we want from Bristol Waste. There have been a number of things underneath that Tony will talk about, which form the basis of service improvements over the next 12 months. And it's all happened, of course, within a very challenging discussion about budgets. So we've been able to have that dialogue whilst obviously keeping an eye on the overall budget challenges that you are all very familiar with. And there's a wider piece to this as well, which is beyond the business plan for Bristol Waste. Bristol Waste is now, I would say, a really active player in the wider work going on around waste transformation in the city, in the recent Mayor's Waste Summit, where we brought city partners together, the universities, Network Rail and others, to try and really change the way the city's relationship with waste. And now we have, I think, a better alignment now with than ever before. So Bristol Waste is part of that solution, working with city partners.
Stephen, I believe you're now handing over to Chris Holmes for 2 minutes.
That's right, Chair. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Board of Bristol Holding have had opportunity to review and provide some assurance on the Bristol Waste, the proposed business plan, and do endorse the plan. However, noting a number of points, which I'll just very briefly touch upon. and will be in the final commentary that comes for Cabinet. So what you have in front of you is, for Bristol Waste, is a very detailed and ambitious business plan, particularly given the shareholders' challenge of absorbing the costs of a new service in terms of Hartcliffe Household Reuse and Recycling Centre, and delivering some further improvements within its existing financial envelope. And those improvements are embedded in the plan, and they include things like certain initiatives like flats recycling, engagement with students, and further waste reduction campaigns. Well, the most significant of which is probably the intention to move to a village approach, which looks at, particularly with regards to street cleaning, and that makes making the service a lot more neighbourhood centric. Importantly, the plan excludes any further costs of Big Tidy, and if the council wishes this to continue, then funding will need to be separately identified. And it also excludes any significant changes to core contract service delivery, which may provide opportunities for cost savings. The strategic objectives have been agreed with the strategic client, and as set out in the plan, revolve around promoting citizen ownership of waste and recycling in the city, delivering measurably cleaner streets, and providing leadership in the delivery of waste and recycling services, as well as delivering innovation and bespoke waste management solutions. Obviously, reducing waste and increasing recycling volumes is a key priority, and the plan incorporates a few planned deliverables, albeit limited due to the budget constraints. It should be noted that the performance targets have yet to be agreed, and you can see that from within the plan, but that will be finalised before the actual Cabinet report. With regards to the core waste contract, which is for refuse collection, disposal, street cleaning, graffiti removal, and so forth, the assumptions within this plan will deliver a small surplus for 22-23 of around about £144,000. It should be noted this does include absorbing the running costs of the new Hartcliffe Reuse Centre, as I stated earlier, from the start of the financial year, and the estimated cost of running Hartcliffe will be around £750,000. So significant work has been done by the company to identify and deliver efficiencies to achieve this, and it should be noted that the assumed margin from a business perspective is quite low, and furthermore, contract revenue over the period of the financial plan is only assumed to increase by 3% over the next 5 years. So in reality, that will require the delivery of ongoing efficiencies and improved income from initiatives such as waste mining, reuse, and other initiatives. One of the key risks that within the plan is that it is predicated on maintenance of relatively buoyant recyclate prices compared to those pre-pandemic, although it's fair to say that they are lower than forecast for this year, with ongoing growth over the next 5 years. And whilst there are good reasons to justify higher commodity prices being sustainable, this is a significant risk, and should prices fall, then losses will be incurred on this part of the business, and there could be a call on the contract payment mechanism, additional cost to the council. So we highlight that as a risk to the plan. Overall, the plan indicates a surplus of 705,000 for the next financial year, of which 234,000 is assumed to be generated through non-TECL or commercial activities. From a commercial perspective, again, this is a low margin on a £55 million turnover business, and that underlines that this is a very, very tight business plan, but achievable. I think that's all I need to say on that, apart from really just to say that some of the focus for the growth of non-TECL is assumed to be through expansion of FM services, and deliverability of this growth will no doubt be a challenge, but we believe that with the current board and executive that they are achievable. So overall, the holding company concludes that the plan is deliverable, but very tight, and there are significant risks which may have impact upon financial performance. Thank you. I'll now pass over to Tony and Adam to introduce.
Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me? Yeah. Great intro. Gave a lot about the business. So if I can follow on, really our focus is always about improving the quality of what we do, looking at how we do it. There are tight margins, and it can be difficult in the environment we're in, but we're always looking of ways that we can improve what we do, add more value to the city and also to the residents. But while we do that, a focus on our employees being looked after and providing the work safely is paramount. So I think over the last 12 months, we've all suffered a bit in one way or another, some more than others, but we've still managed to deliver our service. All our core service has been put out, and I think that's a huge thank you from our operators and support staff. So we couldn't have done it without them. I've highlighted a few key successes. First one, 1,500 refurbished laptops. We've taken on a contract now where we take laptops in from the city, refurbish them, rebuild them, and then with council officers redistribute them around the city. We've done 1,500, we've got another 1,500 to go. We've taken Big Tidy, it was mentioned earlier, to 16 different neighbourhoods, which has improved the standard of the neighbourhood and brought it up to a really good standard. HRRC, the Household Reuse and Recycle Centre in Hartcliffe, was mentioned. We started the construction on that. It's been a long time coming. The construction is well underway now, and we're hoping over the next few months that will be open. And anyone that's been caught in the traffic out the front of it for the last month or two, we can only apologise. The commercial waste services, it's been quite tough through the pandemic, and a lot of companies have struggled, but we've still managed to grow the commercial aspect of our business by 30% by providing good value service locally and doing the job well. We've also mentioned about the FM, we've welcomed 180 new staff into the business that look after the soft services for the council, mainly security and cleaning. And as mentioned earlier, we are on target to achieve our forecast and financial returns, along with the additional efficiencies that we committed to. Next slide really there's some big numbers here, a lot of stuff that we do. And we can call out 17 million collections, 180,000 tonnes of waste averted from landfill, and there's a lot of big numbers there, but thanks to the hard work of our staff and support staff, this is almost becoming business as usual now. So I won't dwell on that, but it just gives you an overview of what we do. So really about moving forward. Strategy is to make a good business better, and we've introduced a transformation programme that's going to help us do that. And I think whilst we're always looking at ways to reduce waste, which is key, improve recycling, I think the big step change we've had, as Stephen mentioned, over the last 3 months, is that we've got a closer working relationship now with a strategic client, and that's helping us a great deal. We've got good strategic direction, and we can plan together exactly what the council wants and how we go about doing that. So that's all in a huge amount of detail in the plan. And I'll repeat myself on the people and make no apologies. Our staff are at the heart of everything we do, and without them we'd really struggle. So our focus really over the next year or so is to find ways to look after them better, to retain them, retrain them, and get them to a point where they're proud to work for Bristol Waste and they want to add value to the city. The last one really, business at a glance, which Adam.
Yeah, I can talk this, Tony. Chris has covered most of the points I was going to say, which is great. So in the business plan, this is our very high-level numbers. Within the pack, we've broken this down between municipal, commercial and workplace services, or FM, which we haven't done previously. But we've also provided the tech or non-tech or split of that as well. We are operating on thin margins for a £54 million business, but each of those business divisions is returning a surplus, and we've also delivered the savings we said we would to Bristol City Council on the FM contract, so that's working well. We're set up for future growth. It will be a challenging budget for 22-23, but it will be deliverable. We're not looking for any further investment from the council, and we'll be reinvesting in capital equipment ourselves.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much. I now turn the floor open to councillors. We have 30 minutes, so who has the first couple of questions? Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Chair. I think you said 2 questions at a time, didn't you? So, right. Okay. First question, Tony, in terms of producing a budget like this, we talked about co-working with a strategic partner and so on. But normally a business would work out its budget and almost work out its pricing or what it's going to charge for the contract once it's worked out its costs. Is that how this is operated, or have you actually been given an envelope in which you have to quote and therefore you've had to tailor your costs to fit?
We do have a set amount that we're paid on a monthly basis for the standard contract, and everything that we do works around that. The working closer with the client is more on a strategic level. You know, we've got a package of work to do, we're paid a certain amount to do it, and it's really what value we can give to the council, what we can achieve within that package. Now, there are loads of things that we'd like to do extra. We've improved the work we do. We've added a load of efficiencies, which again you'll see in the plan. But there's a certain amount we can do with the funding allocated, and it's our remit is to give the core services, which is priority, and any other services that council are looking for in addition to the core services. So we do work closely with them around what they want, but there is a certain amount of money that we can operate the contract within.
Okay, thank you, Tony. And the second question, which is, I fear may be decided is more of a service issue. I don't know whether this is just in BS9, but I'm just intrigued as to why it is that street cleaning happens hours or the day before the refuse collection and not afterwards. And whilst I recognise that's no difference to cost as far as Bristol Waste is concerned, in terms of the council taxpayer, there is a massive question about how logical it is and why waste then has to be left on the pavements and on the roads until the next time the street cleaner comes round. And a secondary issue to that is there any way ward councillors could actually know when roads in their ward are due to be cleaned so that they can actually convey that information to residents and be aware when the contract isn't being met?
Yeah, I'll pick up the first one. One of the reasons that we're looking at, when we talk about innovation and we talk about the village approach, one of the things we want to do is to have each area, each ward has its own cleaners, and they will work eventually with the refuge and recycling crews so that as a team they will all work together so that the recycling, the refuge is done with support of the street cleaning crews. At the moment, we've talked about this before, where the street, you know, can we just follow the recycling vehicles and follow the refuse vehicles on the street cleaning? And it's something that we've looked at, and I think from a company point of view, if we can go to this village approach where we'll have a set area where we can work closely with the crews, that will help. Again, you know, we've had the discussion before where the recycling comes, the street can be littered because the bins can be overflowing, it's windy. By the time we arrive there, the streets are already dirty. Our crews, when they're emptying the bins, doing the recycling, can't stop. They're blocking up the road as they are. They can't stop and empty, you know, clear the street at the same time that they're doing the refuge because they'd never get the rounds done, plus they block up the street for a lot longer. But, you know, we are trying to make arrangements where the streets will work closely with the refuge, not necessarily follow them round, but come after they've been.
Councillor Fodor.
Thanks very much. Yes, I was going to ask about the village approach, which sounds, you know, interesting and innovative. It would be helpful to arrange a briefing for members about that as it emerges. I think all councillors will be interested. It did sound like you said it is a ward-based thing, so I do hope you'll be able to work closely with ward councillors who have links to all the community groups and sort of reports we get and so on as representatives. I'm curious how it will affect the business, because the teams and the equipment and the scheduling that's going to be needed ward by ward will mean like 35 different teams, presumably, and there would be a relationship with the ward, I hope.
Yeah, there will be, and we've broken it into 6 areas, so there'll be teams in each area which will cover maybe 1, 2, depends on the size of the area, the wards, and it'll also take in the arterial routes as well. So we're looking at how that can be done, how each ward can be best served, but working, improving the relationship with the councillors is one of the things we'd love to do. And I think once we get a group that will look after that set area, the relationship with the councillors, with the community engagement officers should improve, quite a lot. So something we'd encourage, and it's a work in progress, we're nearly there, but when we get clearly defined about how it's going to work, the areas are set out, who's going to be where, then we'd love to brief you.
That would be really helpful, and I'd look forward to that. I think there'll be a lot to gain from getting the finer details right in the areas, and how things are scheduled and reported and so on.
Well, both ways for us, because if the councillors are telling us what is important to them, then that's something we'll certainly look at.
Okay, I've got a second point at this point. So going back to the comments made about the big tidy costs. So cleaner streets was an objective for many, many years. The big tidy's become one of the bits of that programme. But it does say clearly that is to be negotiated separately with the authority. So it appears it's not a priority in terms of the core service, and yet it's a priority because the authority wants it. So it might be one for our strategic clients.
So, I mean, a good example of the interrelationship. So what we're saying is the Big Tidy was a really good initiative. It still is a good initiative. It is effectively going in and doing deep clean over things that have been not frankly looked after for many, many years. And clearly, therefore, it's the point is to, rather than keep just seeing it as a campaign, turn it into the core business of Bristol Waste. So there isn't core funding in the budget, but there is a pot of money that we will be able to use to ensure that Big Tidy is effectively phased out and replaced without a sort of a big break in service by the village approach. So we will ensure that there is a smooth transition.
Okay, so in that regard, again, it will be helpful to work with ward councillors. I mean, the signs appeared on some posts around my neighbourhood, but until they appeared, no one knew there was going to be a Big Tidy in that particular part of Bristol. And then kind of we thought, right, what can we get out of this? Because we know where those problem areas are. We'd like to work closely on things like that. So I hope there'll be ways of making it work better, sort of on the ground with those of us on each side of the council.
Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. So 2 questions that I've got. On page 46 of our papers, you talk about the Clean Streets Forum. It looks like it was set up in 2019 and the Facebook page was set up, but nothing else has happened since then. Can you expand on what the Clean Streets Forum should be doing and how it's communicated and informed your work? And my second question, so I'll get that in then, can you expand around the issues about replacing the vehicle fleet to ensure net zero compliance by 2030, please?
Yeah, the Clean Streets Forum was set up to work with the council to see what we could do, how we could improve things. I think the village approach will take over a lot from the Clean Streets Forum. We also have evening meetings. I get involved with the anti-graffiti forums, that gets involved with Clean Streets. The ops director works on another Clean Streets forum. So we do talk about how we can improve things all the time with councillors, with council officers as well. So it is something that's continually talked about. There are set meetings that we go to try and improve that. And the village approach will improve on that again, we believe. On the vehicles, we've just replaced the fleet now with Euro 6 diesel engines. We run off gas to liquid fuel, which is low on nitrous oxide. We've put our own tanks in to try and reduce the use of diesel. It's built from natural gas. But these vehicles will last us now probably 6-7 years. When we look at 2030, when we changed the fleet recently, we looked at electric vehicles, and the cost for the refuse and recycle vehicles was probably 3 times the cost of what we paid. Plus, there was no real infrastructure in there to do them. And Bristol being quite hilly in places, electric vehicles aren't always the easiest to use. All the smaller vehicles, we've gone to electric. Forklift trucks, we've gone to electric. The new sites we're building at Avonmouth and Hartcliffe, we're putting PV cells on, so we're trying to reduce the carbon footprint that way. 2030, I think things will change. It'll probably go more hydrogen-based than battery-based. So I think the technology will change by 2030 when we start looking at replacing our vehicles. But we bought at the time, that was best for the city with the Euro 6 diesels and changed what we could to electric.
So will the vehicle fleet be compliant by 2030 though?
All the vehicles?
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to look at what's available. At the moment, they're compliant. If 2030 is pure electric or pure hydrogen, then we'll have to look at what's available and what we can replace the fleet with.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick comment to say that every councillor has put his hand up to speak, so please be patient while I get to you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you. I was just learning to be patient then. So, thank you, Chair. Okay, on page, always difficult to know which page is which. On this page 82 on my pack, there are some good graphs. It says Section 5 City Waste, Recycling and Cleanliness. And it's got sort of the what the city wants to see regarding recycling rates and reductions in residual household waste targets. When I looked, though, at the business plan and the projections for the future, I didn't really think that had been projected into that. Is that projected into your business plan at the moment or not?
Yeah, all our targets are projected into the business plan. A lot of the targets where we look at recycling, again, working closely with the strategic client, we'll have to change how we do things, and that might mean a different way of doing the collections. Other authorities are looking at 3-4 weekly collections. So there's lots to talk about. At the moment, nothing will change apart from what we do at the moment. We're still the #1 core city in England for recycling. We have been for many years. So the targets to reach in 2030 will be difficult to achieve, and we will have to change how we do things. And also work a lot with the residents of Bristol. Be a lot of behaviour changes as well to try and increase the recycling to what the government targets are.
Okay, thanks. On page, again, you'll know this business, Section 8, Financial Plan. I think this is the section to do with workplace services. So you've taken over security, cleaning services, etc. for the council. You've got here a projection to increase revenue, more than double it over the next 4 years. I mean, that's very ambitious. I was just wondering if you could talk us through how you think you're going to achieve that major increase in income.
I'll take it, yeah. No, it's a good question. We've consolidated in the BTC security and cleansing service, and that's given us a platform for growth. So there are lots of bids around in Bristol and the surrounding areas that we can target. We're strengthening our business development team and our bid writing team, and that sort of work tends to be quite chunky. So it's not a gradual increase. We can take it on in bolt-on bits. So we've got a decent platform to grow on. So we think that's an achievable growth projection.
Can I just ask, have you won any commercial bids yet?
We do have some commercial work, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you. I've been doing quite a lot of litter picking recently in Southmead, and I've noticed that very few people seem to use the lids that you can put on your boxes to stop waste blowing around. I always do, but I've seen very little evidence of it elsewhere. So is it worth having a bit of a campaign to tell people that might improve the situation with stopping waste blowing all over the place?
Yeah, we are looking at several campaigns this year. and putting out the recycling, how the box is done, what goes into it, a lot overflow. And when we talk about earlier, when we arrive to pick up the recycling, there's literal over the street. Normally it's a windy day, people have overfilled the boxes, put them out on the street, and that causes a problem. We did try nets, that didn't really work. We put the big cardboard bag out, so a lot of the stuff that was recycled, we've now given a different container, so hopefully that's helped as well. But we've got a huge exercise this year coming on bin composition. What goes in there, 50% of what goes in the bin shouldn't be in there, in the normal waste bin. It could be recycled. 25% is food. So if we can, talk to the residents, have a behaviour change campaign to say, if we can take out 50% of what's in the bin and recycle it properly, it'll make a massive difference to the city, the finances, and our recycling rates. So we're continually looking at that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Batchel.
Thanks, Chair. Hello, team. I was going to ask about the complexity of doing your business in Bristol. It's a difficult place. Accessing many of the properties is a problem. I see the businesses absorb some extra growth in terms of new homes to the point of 1.6 million. You've got a flats recycling programme due to start in about a year and a half, which won't be cheap. Do you think that the current formulation of the pay mech is a sustainable approach to fund your tackle business?
Take that one.
Yeah, I think the pay mech it's a risk-reward mechanism, as we know, and essentially it protects the business and also benefits our shareholder for significant movements in the recycling income predominantly, and it drives efficiencies. So we've reviewed it this year in line with strategic client and BCC shareholder. We've agreed an amendment to the percentage from 15 to 14%, which was always the intention. It drives efficiency in the business, and that's something we do. So we're comfortable with it in the business plan, and our board has all agreed it.
Second question from me, again about TECOR and non-TECOR. Obviously, the work that you do for the city is a tough enough job. Have you got the capacity to really focus on the non-TECOR side of the work, which is perhaps more lucrative, but more challenging in terms of actually winning and securing that work?
Yeah, did I do that one? Pick that one up. When we look at growing the business, we've done a lot of TECOR work because we work closely with the council, and I think with the FM it was in the interests of both ourselves and the council to take the work across, passport it across. There are massive opportunities within the city for commercial work which probably would run at higher percentages, and we are looking to strengthen, as Adam said earlier, looking to strengthen the business development team to look at external work. I still think, because of the relationship with the strategic client, if there's stuff within the council that we can support, and it does save the council money as well as us making a very small income from it, which eventually goes back to the council in one way, shape or form, then I think we need to look at overall as a business, as a company that's owned by the council, what's in the best interest of the council. If there's opportunities outside, and we already have a few commercial customers that we can chase, we will do both. So we'll run them in parallel, and it may be that the council say after 6 months, just focus on that, and we'll take the direction. But we are looking at it both internal TECOR and external non-TECOR, and are building up our management team to cope with both.
Councillor Morris, and thank you for being so patient.
My first question really is, I'm glad you mentioned about your staff and your employees, how important and integral they are to the business. Do you measure their happiness?
Yeah, we've done a survey. We actually did a reinduction of all the staff about a year ago where we did it evenings and weekends, and we came in and talked to all staff, all 600 of them, and got a view back from what they thought. And we have a plan of things that we need to improve on, and the things that they accepted were that we did well. So we do take notice, and I think part and parcel mentioned that we need to look after the staff. They need to feel valued, they need to feel listened to. That's really important to us, and we do listen to them as much as possible, and we do try and take on board what they say, how we can improve their welfare, and how we can look after them better and retain them. You know, and that just doesn't go with us. We had Marvin down a few weeks ago to come down and talk to the street cleaning crew, just so he could get a view of what their feeling was, whether they've been treated well, the sort of ups and downs, the goods, the bads, and from there we'll have an action plan again to ensure that when they're listened to, we do something about it.
No, that's good. That's good to hear, because I always say hello and chat to staff when I'm using Days Road or something like that. And one of the staff at Days Road mentioned to me, for example, that they have no shelters. So, you know, from 8 in the morning in the summertime to 6:45, I think it is, they could be out in the beating down sun all day long. So, under the health and safety concerns, you know, that's something which I hope that you have heard and you will take on board.
Yeah, we will do. At the side to Avonmouth, we did put, that was one of the concerns, we put 2 shelters either end of the HRRC at Avonmouth. So if there's a shelter needed, we'd certainly look at that. It concerns their welfare.
That's great, thank you. And obviously, a lot of us had quite full inboxes over the summer months when the grass cutting was ceased due to a shortage of drivers. So, how can we ensure that we don't get a shortage of drivers this year? But also, you know, what are your plans to ensure that there's sufficient skills in your labour force for the future?
Well, with the drivers, it was a national shortage, and we've over-recruited now. We have a set number of drivers that will cover the 90 rounds that go out, plus holidays, plus sickness, and we've increased the headcount now, so we've over-recruited on the drivers. So during the Christmas period in January, we've been okay with drivers. We check it on a daily basis to make sure that we've got enough. We've also increased the number of agencies that we use, so we've increased from sort of 7 or 8 up to about 15. So during the summer, the driver shortage was a massive issue, and I think we all suffered. And to keep the core services going, you know, the green waste was suspended for longer than we'd have liked. But it was really important to us to keep the core services going and the streets clean, and that's where our focus was. But you know, to counter that now, we have employed more drivers, and the head count for the number we need is above the requirement. So we'll keep it monitored all the time. We do weekly meetings and daily checks on it.
So it shouldn't happen again?
Well, unless there's a massive COVID strike, and you know, some things are kind of out of our control. All we can do is do everything we can to mitigate it.
Yeah.
And look after the drivers we've got and ensure that we've got as many recruited as we can. And we're continually looking at that.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, Adam has got something.
Yeah, just to add something to that. So you know the government boot camps that they promoted to train drivers up through and upskill them? So there was a delay to those, but they have started now. So we've identified 14 employees from the workforce, from all areas, to go through that process. So we're also looking internally for progression routes up through.
I'm going to take the opportunity as chair to ask a couple of questions myself. In the business plan, I think you refer to the fact that you've absorbed the costs of new homes being built and the extra waste generated from that. Are you in, and I assume the answer is going to be yes, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Obviously, we have a reasonably good idea of how many homes are going to be built in the city over the next few years. So I assume you are working very closely with the council to start to factor in those additional needs into your plans.
We are, and we're probably going the next stage further. We're talking to Steve from Gorham and looking at how the waste is going to be looked after within, you know, the likes of the Hengrove, how it can be kind of hidden away in the houses, if you like, whether we look at different ways to sink it hide it around the back of houses, to keep it off the streets as much as possible. So we want the estates to look as clean and tidy as possible, but we also need to evaluate how many new homes, what waste is coming, and build that into the amount of waste we have to collect. Because, you know, another couple of thousand houses, you're going to need new vehicles, new crews. And the cost of getting rid of the waste is very expensive, waste disposal.
And I guess the other side of that as well is also in your business plan as a longer term aim, is actually reducing the amount of waste generated in the first place.
Yeah, and that's probably the most important for us, is waste reduction. If you have more houses, if we can focus on the amount of waste that's produced and reduce it as much as possible, that's where the big saving is. We look at recycling, we look at disposal, we look at how it's collected. All those things are kind of business as usual. The big focus for us is reducing the amount that's produced, and that helps the residents as well. If people are throwing 25% of their bin is food that's being thrown, you know, if they don't buy it in the first place, they'll save themselves a lot of money, as well as you know, the amount of on the disposal costs that we pay. So if we can educate people and just change the behaviours of what they buy and how they distribute, get rid of their waste, then that's really where we're trying to go. Reduce the amount as opposed to sort out what we get.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Gollop, you were just in front of Councillor Fodor.
First question, I was slightly surprised at the answer to Graham Morris's question, because on page 75, where you show the autumn 2020 staff engagement results, there were some quite disappointing responses, and you know, the lowest percentage is the answer to "I feel valued and recognised for the work that I do." That I know it's difficult, and the nature of the job is difficult, but that seems very poor. And some of the other comments in the red graphs there would give me serious worries about the relationship and the way of working. And I would like to know, given that that is over a year ago now, what action has been taken and what action is being taken to make sure that situation improves.
Yeah, I mean, we have had an... There we go. So we've looked at middle management, supervisory management and senior management. So we've looked at training for them, so how they talk to the operatives, how they deal with the operatives, that's been done. As senior managers, we've been out, we do talk to them, we've been out on the rounds with them. So we try and integrate and learn as much as possible. I think the fact we took, you know, we actually did the survey in the first place was for us nowhere to hide, and we wanted to know, you know, what the true feelings were so we could do something about it. And it is disappointing if they feel they're not valued, and we've improved welfare. We've brought on a BUPA scheme where they can claim for some of the dentistry and other stuff, which hopefully improves their terms and conditions. So we have tried to engage more, we have tried to train more, and we have tried to make them feel valued and listened to. You know, Marvin was part of it, but we've all done the same.
Chair, I won't ask another question on that topic, but it's just something I would flag up that I think we should be concerned about, but as effectively being responsible employers, that we should be pursuing that, and perhaps it's something we could look at in the future. But the second question of this batch, I wanted to go back to my comment about the budget. Now, as I see it, the main tackle contract, you're looking at a 3% increase in the value of the contract, which I recognise is remarkably similar to the percentage increase in the council tax that the council is looking to levy. But I question what allowances have been made for inflation and the pressure of inflation that is likely to come in the next year. And I ask that in the context that the anticipated length of time inflation will last is significantly longer now than it probably was at the time when you started producing the budget. And we've got a scrutiny from both points of view. We've got a scrutiny from the council point of view to make sure that we're we're not overpaying, but we've actually got to scrutinise it from the contract point of view of saying, is this realistic for you to be able to deliver the service, and what mechanisms are there in place to allow for inflationary increases to cover costs?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. We were setting the budget with a view to that inflation staying in, so we have allowed provision in there. Clearly, labour and then waste disposal are our biggest cost lines in that budget. We do it by allowing for that inflation, but also continue to look at everything we do and how we drive efficiency and do things more efficiently. But there is sufficient provision in this budget for inflation.
Councillor Fodor.
Right, thanks very much. I can see the ambition in terms of increasing food waste recycling, increasing the recycling rate. I'm impressed with things like the Electric Avenue, the Circular Economy Initiative, and the forthcoming High Street recycling, which is great. To be honest, we tried it 30 odd years ago. So it's good that hopefully this time it'll work and stick and improve recycling when people are out as well as when they're at home. So the ambition is there to increase all those gains of materials, but you've shown in the business plan comments that there's a risk because the markets for materials, the price of materials are dynamic and could threaten that, could threaten the viability. But on the other hand, you've also shown that in the long term, actually, we need to have less waste. And I'm concerned that the company can deliver something that's kind of radically different, which is so different from its day-to-day operational structure. It's day-to-day operations in terms, we're picking up materials, we've got teams doing this, we want to do that, we want to divert stuff. And then there's a completely different job of saying, actually, we'd rather people didn't throw away so much.
Martin, can we get to a question, please?
Well, that's a very transformative thing to imply the company can do that at the same time as collecting more and more in the same ways it's been doing. So I see it as a sort of, quite a dramatic change that will be needed. Yeah. Can we put that in place all at once?
So I mentioned briefly there is a wider piece of work going on, which was kicked off by a mayoral summit on waste, and there's now a waste transformation piece of work going on, and that is new. So I'm very happy to give you more information about that. It literally kicked off last month, following, as I say, a city gathering, a city event. I shouldn't use the word gathering; that could confuse people. An event with city partners on waste that Marvin hosted, as I say. The parts of that transformation program that Bristol Waste can service from within basically their contract, they are. So we talked about, for example, behaviour change. So obviously they have a key role, and that is one of the things that forms part of that wider piece of work. Looking at system change, looking at different, taking a different lens, as it were, looking at this as a system problem, is beyond one waste company that has a contract to do, which is where that wider piece of work, which Councillor Beach is now leading, will pick up. So we can talk about that offline if you like, and it's brand new, so I don't expect you would have necessarily heard about it yet.
No, okay, thank you, because I had heard something had happened. We don't know anything about it, and it's the sort of thing we'd want to take account of in the scrutiny work we're planning on waste, which is separately in community. But it implies there's potentially a different role for other things in the city than what this company can deliver to some extent.
Well, we're doing both roles now. I mean, we are doing the collections and the recycling, but we've also got the engagement team and our comms team looking at how we can do things differently, how we can reduce waste. As more houses come on, there's that balance. The more we can reduce the waste, the more cost effective it's going to be. So it's not just about doing the recycling, it's about reducing the amount that comes to the recycle that goes to residual. So it is a kind of dual thing, and the more we can communicate and change behaviours, then the lower the amount of waste to be collected will be, and ultimately that's our aim.
Okay, there's just one thing. The only saving in the week-to-week operation is if there are actually fewer trips down roads. So if the black bin wasn't emptied every second week, but every third week, then there would be a genuine saving to invest in the heavier tonnage of recycling or whatever.
Can I just jump in a moment, because I'm afraid this is turning into a debate rather than questions. Is there a specific question? I think that's what's needed at this point.
Yeah, well, it affects the viability of the company if it's still going down every street, but there's just a bit less in every bin, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we are looking at collection times. Other authorities have looked at 3 weekly, 4 weekly. It's a big decision to make. And a huge amount of work before that would be acceptable. So
but it is
it's
being
not something we can just do.
It is being looked at, and that's where council as client and the cabinet member for waste has a role to play and it's a political decision as well. But it's also part of that wider citywide transformation work. So this is a moment in time, this business plan, and there's obviously ongoing discussions.
Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. So following on from that, you did hint about this Bristol Waste Summit. I'm interested in what its outcomes are and what the agenda was and things like that. I can't find any information on that on the internet anywhere.
So as Councillor Fodor said, there will be a session on waste at the Scrutiny coming up. That will be the time we'll be able to take you through all of that.
Okay, I'll look forward to that then. My other question is that as a person who makes a coffee for our street cleaner, milky 2 sugars every time he comes through, I'm appalled by the 340% increase in reported aggressive behaviour towards your staff. What steps are you taking to mitigate this, please?
Well, we've put video on all the vehicles now. We've had the aggressive behaviour. We've made films where we've included our own staff. They've been involved in those films which have been put out on the net. Any of the incidents that are captured on camera, we report to the police. There's also vehicles mounting pavements. Again, we report to the police. So the aggressive behaviour, we've also put body cams on some of our staff that work in the HRRCs as well. So there's a lot of video evidence about that will be recorded, will be reported, and hopefully will be prosecuted.
Any more questions? Councillor Gollop.
Just following on from comments about the village approach, would it be possible to give ward by ward figures for recycling, for residual waste and other information? I think that certainly for my ward, that would, if we had that information, it would be possible to incentivise residents to do even better. But we don't have that information. We only know a figure across the whole of Bristol.
It would be really good information, but it's not something we can provide at the moment because the collections aren't done ward by ward, and we don't on residential bins do individual weighing. So we can clearly weigh the routes and do the recycling, but it won't match directly to ward at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, you're never going to get that when you've got ward boundaries going down the middle of roads. So I don't think we'd be that worried about it being that precise. But given you are in
do sort of
geographic areas,
yeah.
I just think it could be useful to you, even in identifying where bins might be collected less often because there's less usage. But it would also be helpful, I suspect, to members if we were able to do that. The other question I wanted to ask is regarding the Hartcliffe HRRC. When that was modelled in the past, it was only going to be capable of being operated by reducing the number of hours in the other 2 household waste and recycling centres. Is that still the plan, or are you now able to keep the existing centres open for the same hours as well as opening Hartcliffe for additional hours?
Yeah, we're looking at the usage of them. Days Road, which is very busy, will stay open a lot more. If we can, with the new booking system that we're looking at, we'll know how many people come into the different sites, and we can, if we find out it's very little usage, say Avonmouth or Hartcliffe on a Tuesday and Wednesday, and we can reduce those days to reduce costs, then that's something we'll look at.
Can I come back with one further question as well, Chair? Mentioned earlier the issue regarding flats. Now that is a significant issue, both flats and elderly people, sheltered accommodation. where there were periods in the year where it almost seemed as though you'd never collected from them and it was very difficult to get the service reinstated. It would seem to me that if there is not adequate segregation of waste from those premises because collection is a problem, then the ability to recycle more from them is the potential is very high. I'm just concerned that the period of time over which you're thinking of doing that is still quite long term, and actually those residents are clamouring both for proper segregation of waste, but also collections and knowing what times they're going to collect, rather than having to raise ward cases that get escalated to supervisors and eventually get collected. Is that something you could not bring forward in the hope of improving the recycling rates in those properties?
Well, we are obviously reading that there is a programme of flats looking at recycling and how we can improve that. The timescales to do that are through till October of 2023. If we could bring it forward, we would, but there would be a cost to it. So we're trying to programme it with the staff we've got, and the programme is up for discussion if it needs to be brought forward, but it will have an additional cost to it.
Thank you. Just thinking back to the village approach, for it to work effectively, you need to find local bases, is the way I would look at it, because you could waste a lot of time heading to and from the depot during the actual working day. So are there any plans to go out into each community to try to identify toileting facilities, so, you know, somewhere for them to have a lunch break, somewhere safe if it's raining or something like that?
Yeah, that's already in hand. We've identified a lot of council buildings which we're talking to the strategic client about. Work will be done on those to make places for our staff to go store their equipment and have toilet facilities. That's actually been done now.
That's fantastic. If you find that any wards that are perhaps, you know, short of such facilities, if you let the respective councillors know, I'm sure they would be willing to work with you to identify appropriate sites.
Yeah, I mean, the strategic client has been good, and between us we've identified, you know, different buildings in the different areas which we're trying to convert so that they're suitable. So that's ongoing as we speak.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, this is a very challenging economic environment at the moment, to put it mildly. You've got really tight margins for the type of business that you have, and you've got a really ambitious programme of efficiencies and cost savings. Can you just give us a sense of how you feel the rising kind of operational costs across all levels, so that's people and assets, fuel, energy, but also inflation is going to have an impact on your business over the next year? What sort of projections have you got? It would just be helpful to understand that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, inflation we've modelled in. It is a challenging environment, particularly so fuel won't impact us too much. It's more on the waste disposal. We've modelled inflation in there. On the plus side, the inflation will come through for our material streams, so our income can grow in our non-tackle side. And it's just very tightly monitoring cost control all the time. So we're conscious of the challenging environment, but we just have to operate within it.
And we're constantly looking for efficiencies, and we've laid out all the efficiencies over the last 3-4 years, where we've looked at every aspect of the business and tried to save, and it's just really continuing to do that. And I think now we've got a closer working relationship with the strategic client. Some of the ideas that we're coming up with now are being approved a lot quicker than they previously were, so I can only see things improving. But you know, to keep finding efficiencies is difficult, and it's something we really do keep a very close eye on.
We're coming to the end of our time now. Councillor Fodor.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to say something really positive about all the encounters I've had with the engagement team, and the initiatives around reuse and zero waste. I've been really impressed with that. So I'm delighted that these things are now happening from within a council-owned company rather than the groups outside the company wishing the council was involved in it. So I'd like to be really positive about that and have that on the record. I do see that the sort of scale is still quite daunting. So the Electric Avenue initiative dealt with 332 pieces of equipment or something like that. Do you forecast that carrying on up to reach where we need to reach? I mean, it's quite challenging.
It is challenging, and with the new HRRC at Hartcliffe, it's got a big reuse centre. It'll be the biggest, probably in the south. There's a workshop in there so that stuff comes in can be worked on, pat tested and resold through the reuse shop. We've opened a smaller one, a pop-up one at Days Road as well. We have evening and weekend openings where we reduce the prices to try and encourage people to come along and buy stuff from the reuse shop. So it is definitely part of the business that's growing and has had a lot of focus on it. And it's probably some of the ones we've had some of the nicer comments around as well.
Excellent. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it was early 2016 I said our waste sites ought to be reuse sites. So that's great. Will there be cycle access or pedestrian access to the new facilities? Because that's a long-standing...
Yeah, both. And we've actually arranging for cycle trailers that can be hired. So if people haven't got a car, and they can hire a trailer to attach to their bike. So that's been arranged as well.
Any more questions? Okay, in that case, I think we'll thank you very much for your help and for the way you've answered and responded to the questions. I'm going to give in to my pedantic side at the moment and just remind everybody that the Hartcliffe RRC is actually in Bedminster. It's not Hartcliffe Way, but that's because that's my Hartcliffe bit coming out. But thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks for the questions.
Okay, I think we're now going over to Stephen again to introduce Gorham Homes business plan.
Thanks, Chair. I won't say what I've said before because it's the same for Gorham in terms of the working relationship. The business plan is obviously there for a concise and accurate summary of the requirements and the expectations of the client. Clearly a different situation in that this is not a tackle company. This is a body not law, and that means that we have to be mindful of the separation. But it's been a very close working relationship right throughout, and the strategic objectives are there again. That's our job as the client to set out the strategic objectives that we want from Gorham, which are in their business plan. So the overall picture you see there is a plan that meets our requirements as a client. And critically, of course, the difference here between this and the previous discussion is that pipeline of sites is what we're talking about here in terms of the council's interest in ensuring that it passes over sites to Gorham. OSM members will note the relationship between the Gorham business plan and the document that went to Cabinet yesterday, Project 1000, which was a housing delivery plan for the council and was approved yesterday. That document, this business plan and the HRA 30-year plan that is being taken to full council. Taken together, they demonstrate in effect how the council uses all of the avenues at its disposal to deliver the administration's house building ambitions. So I think it's an emerging picture. Chris will talk about the plan and then Stephen will talk you through some of the details. Obviously, Hengrove Park being a particularly striking and newsworthy addition to the pipeline is something as a result of that close working relationship we have with Gorham. And so obviously very supportive of what you're hearing tonight. So I think Chris is next.
Carry on, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Bristol Holding, again, have had opportunity to undertake an outline review of the Gorham Homes proposed business plan and are pleased to endorse it for approval by the council with the following outline comments. I think first and foremost it should be noted that by its very nature this is a framework plan, and so with the exception of Romney and to a lesser extent Baltic Wharf, business and financial assumptions can only be at this stage indicative. And as further work is done on each site, and it goes through the planning process, and it goes through design, and it goes through the appointment and development with the joint venture partners, and individual business cases are prepared, then on a site-by-site assumptions, then numbers will inevitably change. Indeed, even during the development of this plan, we've seen changes in what are likely to be deliverable in one or two of the sites. That said, the plan outlines a pipeline delivery of just under 3,000 new homes over the next 10 years, and this is significantly higher than assumed last year, following the inclusion of Hengrove, which in itself aims to deliver over 1,400 homes. And operating through a joint venture model with private developers, the Gorham business model is able to generate significantly more affordable housing than pretty much any other private housing development model. Indeed, this plan aims to deliver some 48% of the overall pipeline being affordable, while still delivering a significant return back to the council and maximisation of land values, which in itself provides a return to the council in the form of interest repayments. So over the next 5 years, it's assumed that Gorham will acquire through loans with the council some £67 million worth of land, of which £32 million worth will have been repaid over the same period as house sales start to crystallise. Stephen mentioned the strategic objectives, and they focus around the pace of affordable and sustainable housing, which help create inclusive communities. And these are reflected in the key performance indicators. However, members should note that the Gorham operates as a company not governed by public law, which means it has greater freedom in selecting strategic partners and other procurement matters, but must primarily operate commercially. And the business plan aims to deliver between 15 and 17% return on gross development value of each scheme. But despite the commercial nature, the plan details significant environmental and social value that Gorham intend to achieve from its partnership model. And Gorham do work with the National Social Value Portal to ensure that these are recognisable and achievable metrics. A key financial assumption which underpins the plan is that land values will make up the majority, if not all, the collateral to make up the 50% share of each joint venture. Obviously, that will need to be tested as the housing proposals are worked up by the company. Any further project investment required will need to be contained within the 30 million the council has set aside in reserves for loans to support the company or reinvestment of profits or perhaps third-party finance. Although we currently don't think the inclusion of Hengrove within the programme will impact on the need to draw down more than the 10 million agreed by Cabinet this time last year for the Pipeline 2, it may require more flexibility in the assumed split between working capital and any land investment. And really just to end by cost and sales assumptions for Romney and to a lesser extent Baltic Wharf are based on detailed financial modelling and have been subject to quite significant stress testing. We think those underlying assumptions are prudent, and the assumptions that Baltic Wharf will commence in 2022 adds, ironically, additional prudence into the early years of this plan. So on that basis, the Holding Co Board are happy to endorse this plan.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to move straight on to Stephen to do his presentation, and then we'll have 30 minutes of questions afterwards.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Chris. That was very thorough. Thank you very much. So next slide, please. So what we wanted to do is provide you a little bit of an overview of the things that we've been doing since the last business plan that we presented to you last year. So we said that we would do last year the 4 points at the top so that we'd enter into our first joint venture contract. We've done that at Romney House, and we're very pleased to have received reserve matters today from Bristol City Council and looking forward to starting on site imminently. We have established a development programme, as Chris has already said, of now nearly 3,000 homes, so well over our target of 1,700. We've got our repeatable legal joint venture structure, which we're able to deploy on a number of sites now moving forward, and that's really increased our speed through the procurement process even further. We are now a fully operational business. We are a young business. We are a very small business as well. Unlike Tony's very large business with his staff, we are only 6. So we're a small company, and we have been growing in our capability over the last few years, and we have an excellent company that's able to work with the private sector to be able to take forward an enormous pipeline for the city. So we're very pleased with our progress to date, and our 2022 plan looks to aim to complete our design competitions at Castle Park. Some of you will have seen that we've commenced that piece of work, and we had a huge take-up from the market with over 37 bids from people wishing to help us design an innovative solution for Castle Park, and that's the beginning of a process that will run on now through the rest of the year. We're well on target to complete a large water source heat pump. That's 3 megawatts at Castle Park Energy Centre, where we've been able to work with council, the strategic client, to be able to support the delivery of a key piece of infrastructure that will interface with an overdevelopment into the future of houses. So our role is key in being able to help support the infrastructure and be able to link through into the future development so that the information can flow smoothly from one project to the next. And as we've said already, we'll be looking to start on Romney House in Llps. We'll also be looking to build on what we've already mentioned this evening, which is Hengrove Park. So we were really pleased to be asked by the council to look at this in December last year. So we're early in our planning on the project, and I'm sure there'll be some questions on Hengrove as we move through. Next slide, please. It doesn't change on my screen, does it? I've got to click my own computer. It's very confusing. We've some highlights for you from our plan. We have an ambition to move to net zero carbon homes. Our programme is 2,992 homes. And as Chris has said, that's our estimate pre-planning. The majority of our programme is still pre-planning. And as all of you will know, the planning process means that we will change our programme as we go forward. So that 2,992 will change as we move forward. We have ambitious targets to deliver affordable housing. We have managed to secure a forecast of 48%, but we would like to deliver as much affordable housing as we can do within the realms of what is commercially viable for us as a business, maintaining our status as a body not governed by public law, but our target is to deliver 50% affordable. The amount of work that we'll be doing through the projects that we are bringing forward in this plan, we'll see £438 million of construction work taking place across the city, which is a significant boost to the economy. We have in all of our plans since Gorham has been in place, looked to embed sustainable communities in all that we do. So for us, it's not about just building new homes, it's about building places where people want to live. That's critically important for us, and we think this plan supports that approach. There'll be 14 new developments across the city. You'll see from our site list that some have gone from last year's, and as we mentioned, some have come in. We expect that to be the pattern as we move forward, as priorities change and working with the council on sites that will come and go. As we know more about these projects, a lot of the sites that we're looking at, we're still very early in our understanding of how we're going to develop them moving forward, and they may fall away over time. We have always said as well in our plans, as we've been seeking to innovate as an organisation. So we're doing lots of work to look at how we can use modern methods of construction. The whole sector, housing and construction, has been innovating enormously in the last 18 months. And we're working hard with our partners to make sure that we're making the best of the innovation that we can to deliver the best homes for people to live in on our sites moving forward. And biodiversity, this is something that we've really started to push very hard on our projects. So we're aiming to make a biodiversity positive net gain on all of our on-site on all of our developments. So the challenge to all of our partners when they come forward is not looking to offset with biodiversity on other locations, but actually try and make sure we increase biodiversity on-site in all of our developments as we move forward. Next slide, please. So the highlights of our plan are Hengrove Park. We're very excited to be able to talk to you today about that opportunity, which is 1,435 new homes, 50% affordable is hard baked into our plan, and we're already actively thinking about how modern methods of construction can be brought forward to help accelerate delivery at Hengrove Park. We've talked about our innovative energy solution at Castle Park Energy Centre. We want to use the learning that we've gained on that and see how we can innovate on other projects in the future. We are really proud of our groundbreaking design that we're starting to do at Castle Park, and we'll also imminently kick off the same process at Redcliffe Way, and we're working with the community at the Redcliffe, the Joint Delivery Board, to be able to bring that forward. The Romney House development delivers a skills academy where we're working with City of Bristol College and UE, because we really want to leave a skills legacy in the developments where we work. So we don't want to provide unskilled labour only jobs in the developments that we have. We actually want to be able to provide some training so that people have skilled jobs and then start their pathway in the construction industry with our investment in their skills moving forward. And sustainability, you'll note the projects that have come out of the Gorham Homes business plan at Novus Hill, in part, so that we've reduced the number of homes there down to a smaller number to protect the ecology after the work that we did with the council to establish the areas that could be redeveloped. And we've got the hard-baked commitment to biodiversity net gain across our plan. So over to you guys for questions on the plan.
Thank you, Stephen. Who would like to go first? Councillor Kent.
Hi, thanks. You obviously mentioned Hengrove Park. It's a £290 million development. You said you've got 6 staff and so far have not completed a single development. Do you think there's any risk with your suddenly taking on Hengrove Park? And so what's your delivery schedule looking like for delivery on Hengrove Park?
So we're really excited and confident that our model can be easily deployed into the Hengrove development. As I mentioned earlier, we're really early in our programme of how we're going to take forward the Hengrove development. We're starting to talk to the market, talk to bidders who were interested in the previous procurement, and start to establish a strategy of how we're going to take it forward. So at the moment, we're really early in how we're going to be able to take this project forward, but it fits really neatly in with the joint venture structure that we've got in place for all our other projects. It just has larger scale over a longer period of time. After we've gone through this process and the business plan hopefully is adopted by Cabinet, we have a structure of meetings, and hopefully we'll be able to sit down, Councillor Kent, and go through some of our thoughts and ideas and take your views in how we're going to take the project forward.
Okay, thanks. I'll go for a second question then. Looking at the sort of the greater picture then with Gorham Homes, we've got in the land purchase funding and the land loan note balance, which involves £67 million of land. After that is the stress testing and looking at whether or not there could be an unfortunate economic shock. And then added to that, we've got the 10 or 12 million pounds of loans you've had. You take the stress testing into account, it sort of shows possibly, if things were to be really bad over the next 3 years, running at around 30 million in the red until you're through that period. It does look as if you could be running up to £100 million of loans over the next 4 years if the stress test was in the worst case scenario. Obviously, the reason I ask that is the exposure of the council. What legal exposure would the council have in that exceptional worst case scenario?
Yeah, do you want to take that, Chris?
Hi, thanks for the question. On the stress testing, the economic shocks we've tested are those from the Bank of England, and we've added further shocks on top of that as well. And the net funding position drops to around 10 million. So even with those shocks, we are operating within the levels that have already been authorised.
Okay, so so I can understand the chart that was in there, you see it dipped to around 10 million.
Yes.
Yes. the following 10 million, then it's not compacting. That's just the same 10 million loss going forward from the previous year, is it? Or it's actually a cash balance rather than a loss, I believe.
It's not a loss situation. It's a reflection of the net cash funding. So it's the borrowing position of the business.
Okay. Just to test this then, if we were to take a look at, there's a couple of models in there. None of them, it doesn't matter which one we use. If we were to say take to 2024 to 2025, it shows the business potentially running at a net cash funding at negative, say, 8 million in 2024, then the same figure for 2025. What does that mean? Does that mean in 2025 an additional 8 million of negative funding has occurred, or is that just reflecting the previous 8 million from the previous year?
It's the transactions during the year that take place, and this is a position at a point in time. They don't accumulate year on year. This is the actual position
right. So it's
for
not an
that
accumulation.
Year.
So it's not an accumulation. So
no. Within
the stress testing, you're sort of showing at worst case scenario around 10 million. Then.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the loans for the land acquisition, those would be commercial loans, would they?
They are commercial loans at commercial rate between Gorham and the council.
And then the infrastructure costs, I presume that's provided by your partner, is it?
The infrastructure costs on any site would be part of the site development costs and built into the deal.
Right, so Gorham Homes may have to help finance that as well then, is that correct?
I think, without talking about any site specifics, providing our land value is adequate, it should enable us to demand input from our partner to help fund the infrastructures for each of the sites.
I think the chair's about to kill me, so I'm going slightly over my 2 questions. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I'm a supporter of council housing companies and have been for a long time. I'm pleased that you've got the B Corp accreditation. On the stress testing issue, I just wondered how far the work that's been done has taken into account the shift in mortgage rates, because quite clearly, whilst you have a commendable target towards affordable, part of the business proposition is also having properties built for sale in the open market. So what's your judgment, given the increase to mortgage rates, but likely subsequent increases over the next couple of years?
Thanks. So if you make reference to the market assessment section in the business plan, we've worked with an independent consultant to try and forecast, which is incredibly difficult, the housing market as we move forward. So what we found is that there is at the moment good mortgage liquidity in the market. It's very difficult to forecast what will happen in the next coming years with inflation and interest rates. So we've made our best assumptions based on the information we have, and that's set out in the market section that you can see in the plan. One at a national level and one at a Bristol level.
My second question is about the operation of the Llps. And I understand why you've gone down this route to have a separate LLP for each of the projects. I understand that the financial risk is contained at the level of each LLP, but the health and safety risk might not be. So what measures are you taking as a company and within your wider group to manage and oversee those potential health and safety risks, which in the construction industry are still a major issue?
Yeah, so as Gorham has developed and we've started our first projects, we've put in place a programme of independent health and safety inspection. So whilst we will have responsibility passed through to our partners in our projects, they will be the lead contractor, constructor for each of the projects. We will also do verification, as we've been doing at Castle Park Energy Centre, to make sure that the sites are safe. So you're right to point out that it cannot be contained if there is knowledge of inappropriate behaviour, and that isn't acted upon to be staying within the LLP. We're very confident that we've got robust process in place, and actually it's been taken from Gorham Homes as good practice and applied in other organisations that we're aware of. So our board review, health and safety is part of a standing agenda item number 1 of our board meetings, and it's something that's really important for us moving forward, and we intend to keep that programme of independent inspection running through all of our sites as we go forward, so that we can, as an organisation and as a board, have assurance that the sites are safe for everybody who's working on them.
Thank you. Before I move on to Councillor Gollop, I'm going to use Chair's prerogative and jump the queue. And it's essentially related to both the previous two councillors' questions, which is obviously Homegrove Park is a very large development relative to the previous developments. And as Councillor Bradshaw mentioned, the use of limited liability partnerships or Llps can help limit the exposure. I don't want obviously to get too much into site-specific information, but is there a view towards looking at how Engrove Park might be approached in terms of having separate liability, limited liability partnerships?
I think at the moment, our assessment is a bit too early to say what the deal structure will be in terms of the companies that we may form to deliver Hengrove Park. Hengrove Park, as we said, is large, but it's also got large-scale infrastructure, and it has a large-scale park and large numbers of housing. We may look to create specific limited liability companies and partnerships that deliver specific elements. At the moment, we're very early on in our assessment of how that will go forward. We're actively talking to partners to establish what the best process could be going forward. And we today had a conversation with Homes England, who are very keen to help support Gorham Homes and the council in that journey of finding the right governance structure and the right corporate structure to be able to deliver Hengrove. So at the moment, it's a bit too early to say, and we wouldn't want to limit ourselves as we start to assess it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Sorry to jump in. Councillor Gollop, your turn.
Thank you, Tony. First of all, sort of slightly pedantic comments just in terms of presentation, and I recognise there's a lot of detailed work gone into this, but when I saw the first slide and it said in 2021 we will, and yet we're now in 2022, I guessed that in fact we're referring to the 21-22 financial year, and when you refer to 2022, you're not referring to the calendar year 2022, but the financial year 22-23. Now, I realise that is pedantic, but in terms of presentation for something that is actually the basis for a business plan, that is, to me, quite important. And I've never seen a business plan for a private company presented in that way with that terminology. And then I was looking at the chart on page, the table on page 137 and the chart on page 138. And in looking at that, I see something at the title completions. And I find myself then thinking, is that completions in a building sense that you finish building the house, or is it completions in a legal sense that it's been sold? And there's no explanation as to which that is. And that led me on to feeling that it would have been really helpful to have a table that showed the starts, the sales and the houses in progress as anticipated in the plan, albeit aggregated for each of the projects, and that would have been helpful. But I then also found myself looking and seeing that for 2022, we only have about 30 affordable homes scheduled for completion. But if I look at the previous page, I then see that 2 of the 3 sites are subject to planning and we know have significant potential delays. So it just seemed to me that there was bits of a story there that I wasn't getting, that I think are important in a business plan if Cabinet are making decisions about whether to go ahead. The second question I had, we had comments about stress testing, and we've had comments about the land loan. Chris said that it was at a commercial rate, but I don't know what that commercial rate is, and I don't know whether stress testing has been applied to potential increases in interest rates. Because since you started working on this business plan, we've already had two increases in Bank of England base rate, and the forecasts are that there are more to come. So if we're looking at this over a 5-year period, what would the commercial rate be? And if that commercial rate goes up, the impact on break even could be significant. And I don't know whether that's been reflected in the stress testing, or is stress testing only looking at the saleability of completed homes. So I think I need, and I would hope that Cabinet would need, some understanding of that in determining where they're going. Thank you, Chair.
We're going to break the answer up between us, if that's all right, Councillor. To the last question about the commercial rate, we are assuming a 6%. So, and that's determined by Council in satisfying tax legislation to ensure it's an appropriate charge to the business. And we in turn charge that down into the Llps. So I think the movement in the current bank base rates of 0.25%, 0.5%, moving up towards 1% potentially, it's not significant in terms of impacting on the 6% that we've assumed. And
if I can just add there, Chair, in terms of the perception of base rates over the period of this plan, there is a concern that the Bank of England will increase rates significantly in an attempt to control inflation. Now, we don't need to have a debate about whether that'll work or not, but if that is going to happen, then the rate the council would be paying for its borrowing potentially, but also the rate it should be charging commercially would go up. And I'm asking whether that is reflected in the stress testing, or whether there are potentially additional charges to come in if the council has to charge at an economic rent applicable, an economic rate that's applicable at the time that the loans are made.
I guess just to jump in now, this is probably looking towards the end of the meeting when we start to talk about what concerns we may want to refer to Cabinet. And that may well be one of them, I would expect.
Yeah, and I'm happy to defer it. It's purely the fact that I could not tell from what I read what was in the stress test, and therefore that was why I was asking the question. But I'm happy that that comes in confidential session.
Steve, do you want to respond further?
Yeah, to the first question, if I can clarify the presentation that we put up on the slides. So that is 2021 being last year's business plan, 2022 being this year's business plan. So it wasn't about financial years, and that's probably that I didn't present it clearly enough. And what you'll see is if you look at the 2021 business plan, that's a takeout from what we said that we were going to do. And if you look at the 2022, the statements that are in the presentation are in the 2022 business plan. In terms of the information that we've provided, we've worked with our board and the shareholder as to the information that we put in our business plan. We'll reflect on the information that you've provided today in terms of how we've presented it, and consider how we do that moving forward, so that we can potentially be more clear about the split down on the completions as you've raised going forward. What I would say is that, as you've noted, these are pre-planning and these are estimates. As we move forward in the maturity of Gorham Homes, what you have is a lot more accurate detail when you start on site, and those will go from being estimates into actual on-site delivery profiles. So the granular detail that you'll have will be more developed as we go forward. So at the moment, these are estimates of numbers of homes based on a profile across a development site that will change as we go forward and become more mature on those developments when they start on site.
Chair, just to comment, I understand that they're estimates, but I am flagging up that in a stress test, I'd expect that to be one of the variances that was applied to look at what the implications are. So if we can discuss that later, I would appreciate it.
I can confirm that Lucy has made very strong notes as we were talking. And Councillor Fodor, would you like to ask your questions?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, sort of continuing to look at the charts that Councillor Gollop just referred to, which shows affordable homes completions peaking in what's described as 2025 at just under 200 homes, and then a steady rise of market home completions up to about 350 per year in 2027, isn't it? So I appreciate that the narrative prior to that assures us these are tenure blind construction and good space standards and so on. So that's all very positive. But could you clarify what you mean by affordable, firstly, and why it peaks and then tails off in the latter 2 years that are described?
So what we mean by affordable is that we assume policy compliant levels of affordable housing. So we assume a base position of what Bristol City Council describe as affordable from a Section 106 perspective. So that's social rent and shared ownership. So we assume that as a base. Where we assume additionality, we don't specify a tenure in our business plan modelling because it's too early for us to establish that. But we're looking at the moment in modelling in terms of revenue. So it's a cash number. So we work out a blended income rate for an affordable housing home. What we then do is go through the planning system to establish the actual tenure mix as we go forward. So at the moment, these are numbers of money income lines rather than actual physical houses of a specific tenure type at the moment. And then why they go up and down is because the revenue is linked to the sales profile of affordable housing being built out, and the revenue's flowing earlier than the market. So you get the affordable coming earlier and then the market tailing out because of the way the affordable housing is sold and completed within the modelling. So the affordable housing is paid for at the beginning and then paid through the development period. So you end up with more completions earlier, whereas the market sales get built and then there's a lag and then they get sold. Whereas that isn't the case with affordable housing. It's sold over a period of time all the way through the development.
Okay, I'm not sure I entirely understand the rationale for that, but I appreciate you've tried to explain it. But it does imply there'll be an earlier availability of affordable housing and then less in those latter 2 years?
Yeah, it's to do with the profiling of the...
despite the long programme of, builds that are hoped for.
So the numbers of affordable housing will be delivered as we set out in the plan, and you will see, as we put in the charts, you'll get the affordable housing will be completed earlier on than the sales units, because we've also got lots of flats and they take longer to build and then they take longer to sell. So the affordable will be earlier in our plans than the market.
Can I just quickly jump in? Because my understanding of it was, I could be just muddying in the waters, but my understanding is that usually in terms of social housing, the development agrees quite early with a registered provider of some sort that they're going to take on the affordable housing part of it, whereas with market-driven houses, as its name implies, it's driven by the market.
Yeah, so we work with the council to have conversations about whether the HRA would like to acquire the affordable housing on all of the developments that we bring forward. That's been the case at Romney House, so we've entered into a development agreement with the HRA for them to acquire the affordable homes that we're building there. And there'll be a similar conversation as we go forward with all of our projects with the HRA and other RP partners to decide who wishes to acquire those homes as they come forward. But we've got strong indications on Hengrove Park that will be for the council to look to bring that forward, and Romney House. The rest are yet to be confirmed in our programme.
Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the balance sheet on page 145, I'm looking at the line that says LLP build leases. Now, I'm not sure I understand what those leases are, but I would expect that number to actually increase as opposed to fluctuate slightly and even drop dramatically in 2027. Could you confirm what that line is actually about, please?
That is the investment that we have in the LP, effectively. So we buy the land from Bristol Council, and then that shows as a liability in our books. And at the same time, we then sell a lease into the LP, which shows as a corresponding asset in our books, and that's what that line is. So it reflects the amount that is still invested in the LP for the lease, effectively on the build land, that has not yet been repaid back to us by the LP, and in turn we have not yet paid back to Bristol.
And the reason it fluctuates is that there are repayments in the period that change the figures.
So you're actually getting money back from the number of leases that you sell?
Sorry, shall I carry on? What happens is that the LP, we invest in the LP effectively, that's our contribution, and as the LP generates cash surpluses to reduce its costs, it then pays back the loan notes to avoid the interest charges first before it distributes any profit. So the land element and the lease element are paid down first.
Right. Ah, right, okay. Thank you, Councillor Gollop. My next question is about new build energy performance certificates on page 133. Let me just bring out that page.
Which page is it on our pages? Because
page 11, I think, on your plan, but
Thank
133
you.
on our documents. So there's a massive leap at the very end of Q4 2020 in these new build energy performance certificates. Why doesn't that actually correlate to the number of new build completions, please?
Because there are a number of different separate factors that link through. So it's to do with the way the data is reported. So EPCs come through earlier, so you get there is a description as well about energy performance certificates and why they're a useful measure. So it's one measure alongside these other measures that are provided by our external consultant that's come to just demonstrates that there was a leap in completions that the other blue line and the grey line will catch up on when the data is updated. But the EPCs are some of the early indicators that you get a lot quicker, so you end up with spikes that the rest of the lines catch up with later on. So new build data is difficult because it's not coordinated, so you get lots of different streams and you have to take those different streams and then try and work out trends from those. So EPCs, as you can see, that spike you get is on new build and energy performance certificates, but the others are lagged.
Thank you.
So can I just jump in on that? If you were to carry that line on that scale on a couple more years, you'd start to see the other line coming up to join it.
You'll see movements in the other lines that won't absolutely match because you'll get other variations that will change the data. So they're not very easy to read across the three lines. They're trend information that shows you the direction of travel of the market. So what we're reporting here is that there was a leap in transactions in 2022 when there was a stamp duty holiday and everybody rushed to buy their homes. So that's what this graph is showing you, that there was an increase in transaction volume. And then what we would then do is you could take the trend information that you've got in this graph and then look backwards and try and forecast forwards and into the future. But forecasting into the future with new build development, as we spoke earlier, is quite tricky.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to Councillor Fodor, again, I just asked one quick question myself. I think the Gorham Home commitment is for all new homes to be energy performance rating A, which is similar to what is also going to be in the HOA. on the slide, I think it referred to net zero carbon. So how would we get from EPCA to net zero carbon?
Yeah, so in the plan, in our key performance indicators, we've set ourselves a challenge to get to net zero carbon in use in our homes. That's something we're working with our partners on the projects as we move forward. So the live discussions that we have with our partners that we approach to do developments such as David Court Road, we've asked them to price in moving that development to net zero carbon in use. So there will be circumstances in our plan where that might not be possible. So there are listed buildings that will need to be converted, and that will be a significant challenge. So whilst we don't have just new build homes in our plan, that's why we're being a bit cautious about how we approach that, because St Ursula's will be very difficult to get to zero carbon because it's a listed building, for instance.
Thanks, Stephen. And Councillor Fodor, I believe you may have the last two questions.
Sorry, is that me next then? Did you say?
Yes, you go next, and I'll probably squeeze Councillor Gollop in afterwards.
Sure. I'll try and be brief. So Appendix A, you've got the strategic business plan level KPIs, and you have the KPI listed and then the stretch KPI. And clearly, you know, one is quite a lot more ambitious than the other, whether it's the sort of delivery and financial targets or the environmental and social and procurement, social value targets and so on. Have you got anything you can say about the likelihood of reaching the stretch targets and the factors that will stop you reaching those? And clearly there will be more return for sort of the community and so on if it's the latter, but you must have sort of concerns that you haven't just stuck to one set of targets.
I don't propose to go through every single one and make an assessment about our likelihood of getting to the stretch, but the point of the stretch is for them to be stretching. Now, we want to measure ourselves on our ability to deliver our base KPIs, but in conversations with the shareholder, we all felt that it would be good to take those base assumptions and really push in the way that Tony is in Bristol Waste. The same incentive in Gorham is to try and stretch ourselves to deliver what we absolutely could do at the moment. And then every year we'll review these, and hopefully our stretch will become our base KPI next year, and we'll push our stretch even further forward next year. But we need to be cautious in what we are able to do so that we're able to deliver along on our base KPI. So we think it's a reasonable set of targets, and much developed from last year, as we've got a much better handle on the business as we go forward in the areas that we can really push as we build on the progress we're making on the sites. So, but happy to take it offline and meet further and talk about those KPIs outside of the meeting.
Sure. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. It's difficult to say, but it's good to know the ambition is to make the stretch targets the more standard targets in future. I was going to ask another one, but I'll.
Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Chair. Not for answering now, but it's just a comment about St Ursula's, because if it's starting in 2024, that means the land is sold in 2024, and I would like to make my annual question about the overage agreement, because I don't think that's reflected in the start at that point, and that's perhaps something we can discuss away from this meeting. The other question, which I fear everybody opposite has heard me make comments on before, is in terms of social value. I am totally convinced of the benefits of social value, but I am very uncomfortable with social value being applied in the case of a loss-making company, because as we have discovered in other ways, it doesn't pay the bills. And I am very uncomfortable with us claiming credit, if you like, for social value in Gorham Homes. I'm very happy it's acknowledged, because it clearly is local money, but when it is producing losses, I think to champion social value is inappropriate, because it is money that the council is paying out. One can only look at that benefit when profits are generated. So I would just urge caution. Others may not agree with me, but I think it needs to be noted that it's not appropriate to be promoting it significantly with the level of losses that are currently being reflected.
Can I just come back to the social value that we measure in our plan is to do with the economic benefit of the jobs that are being created as part of the activity that we're doing. So it's not linked to the cash balances in the business at all. It's about us measuring economic benefit from the work that's being carried out. So that's the numbers that you can see in the plan. They're disconnected from the cash balances of the business.
I fully understand that.
Sorry.
But the point is that if at any point until Gorham is in break-even situation, it's stopped trading, it doesn't matter whether it's social value or not, it's cash that the city council and therefore the council taxpayer would effectively have to bear. And that's why, in my view, it is inappropriate to be claiming it as something that can be added back, because it can only be added back when when the company is in surplus.
Shall I respond, Chair? Okay, so the social benefit measure in there is linked to the development, not to a period in time. So, and the developments are profitable. So the two are linked, and there is no claim for the benefit ahead of delivery. It's simply saying for the sites that we have advanced bid information from with our partners who have filled in the social measure through the official portals, and it's been audited, that is the view of the third party of the benefit that is delivered from that development when the development is delivered, which is, and that development itself is profitable.
Okay, thank you. I suspect we may come back to that again. We're going to take a comfort break now. I'm going to be more generous and give 7:10. Okay, before we get started, we obviously have an exempt session later on. What I want to ask at this particular moment is, are there any questions that are going to be asking exempt questions that particularly require the representatives from Gorham Homes and Bristol Waste to remain in the chamber? That looks like a no, so guys, I'll allow you to go to the pub. I mean, go and do some hard work.
Chair, can I just make one point before I go, which is particularly to the directors who aren't used to the environment of scrutiny in the way that we are, and can just make the point that do take our comments as constructive and is part of the process of us trying to understand, and not is anything more than that, because I think to those who aren't used to scrutiny, it can be a very strange process to be on the receiving end of. And as one of the people who's asked the most questions, I just want to make clear there is nothing wanting to be controversial here. It's simply to understand more of what goes on in the process of the companies and the council.
Thanks for making that point, Jeff. And I would say that I did advise everyone in advance that we're pussycats, Willie. With that, okay, the next item on the agenda is the Bristol Holding Business Plan. I believe, Peter, that you're going to do a brief 2-minute presentation and then we're going to go straight into questions. Is that correct?
I think that's the plan, Chair. Good evening, councillors. And nice to be here to present our short business plan this year. We think this will be the last business plan for the holding company under the current board, and we'll touch on that later, and you may have some questions. As per the other business plans, we start our business plan with a quick review of last year's business plan, 21-22. Some of the highlights being the small team were very busy, obviously overseeing the sale of Bristol Energy and BE 2020, and obviously saw that into the liquidation process, which continues, delivering what we believe and we think will definitely be shown to be a best possible solution for the council in about 12 minutes' time as we come to the end of that process. The other main area of work, and that continues in this business plan, was we set up Bristol Heat Networks Limited, which was a grant requirement from central government. And we worked very much with Stephen Peacock's team to put in place the operation, working with the Energy Services team, and that continues today. And we will be making sure we bring the Heat Networks business plan back to you, as mentioned earlier in the meeting. We've continued to support Bristol Waste and Gorham throughout the year, and you've heard a lot about what they were doing in 21-22, and we sat alongside them providing support, as well as scrutiny and assurance to the shareholder and a lot of that activity. What happened at the end of last year, calendar year, was that there were many reviews going on, as I'm sure you're aware, governance reviews, and one of the reviews was by the shareholder to have a look at governance as is and going forward, given the context of the changing landscape. That review was carried out by an independent non-executive, and that review concluded that if there is to be only 2 companies remaining within the group, that being Gorham, Bristol Waste, 2 very different companies as you've heard, then there's no real benefit in continuing with a holding group approach. Now, that decision has not been made yet because that is based on the context of Bristol Heat Networks Limited moving across to CityLeap. But that is our assumption for planning purposes in the business plan, and that's been followed through in the business plan targets, as I'll explain in a moment. So consequently, this is a very short term, very short business plan, looking only 1 year ahead, with a focus on, as I say, seeing the Heat Networks Limited sale through, working very closely with the council team on that, transferring the Holdco functions, which some functions will need to endure and continue, overseeing the final stages of the BE 2020 limited sale and maintaining a modicum of governance oversight because, as you'll see in the business plan, we've reduced our resources by 30%. Our strategic objectives, nevertheless, as long as we're here, don't change. And I think I've touched on the key objectives. Our finances, we have reduced the team because the environment is getting smaller, the group's getting smaller, and we're always looking for reducing the costs. And we've reduced the team by some 30%, and accordingly, the operational costs, as you see going forward in next year's business plan, will reduce by 30%. In terms of risks, our only major risk, there are lots of risks which we're obviously managing, mitigating at any time, but our major risk is having any failure to having clear governance arrangements in place going forward. We believe that is reducing because we've got clarity from the shareholder, we've got the strategic client stepping up, we're working very close in partnership with the strategic client and obviously continue to with the shareholder. So we see that risk reducing further and further. That's all I was going to say by way of introduction of our very short business plan, but Chris and I are very happy to take any questions you've got on the plan.
So who would like to go first? Councillor Bradshaw.
Thanks for the summary. I just wanted to ask about the oversight and assurance aspect of what you currently do within Holdco. And I'm unclear as to how that will be managed in the future because clearly for the subsidiaries left, assuming that Heat Network moves elsewhere, it's a risky environment. One is in the construction world, one is in the waste world, both not easy industries and full of risks and uncertainty. So how will the oversight and assurance issues be dealt with?
Well, Councillor, we don't have the answer to that because that is all part of the process of the transition plan. So as we speak, the teams are starting to meet between the shareholder, strategic client and ourselves to address those very topics. What will be the best way of doing that so as to minimise the risk? I would add, of course, as you know, in particular, but just for the benefit of other councillors, that of course the Holdco is owning after the company groups the company boards themselves have applied their own scrutiny. It is their role to apply that initial scrutiny. And I think as Steve started to touch on, although very early stages and obviously yet to be matured, the operating model for the JV environment for Gorham and the sites, there will be JV boards carrying out the scrutiny of at the operational level of the sites, and then the Gorham boards will be applying scrutiny of the operational boards and the operations, and then we'll have the audit and risk committee still remaining within the scrutiny model with the next model as we go forward. So I should have touched on that. So one of the other observations coming out of both the governance review, the shareholder governance review, and in fact the work we've done ourselves with an independent board evaluation has highlighted how successful the evolving risk management framework and the audit and risk committee work has been. And we'd anticipate, obviously it's for the council to decide, we'd anticipate that will be taken forward because that is definitely seen as best practice.
Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Tony. First, a specific question, if you feel you can answer it in a public session, but your business plan shows 565k of income, and the Gorham plan showed 105k. How much of the difference is coming from Bristol Waste?
Can you take that, Chris?
I assume you're referring to this financial year, Council, as opposed to next. Yeah, the original assumption was around about 300,000 was a charge to Bristol Waste for the current year, and the balance being split between Bristol Heat Networks and Gorham Homes.
Okay, so at that point, Chair, I realised that I should have put in a request for Stephen Peacock to remain, but that probably wouldn't have been fair to Stephen, and I'm sure Mike and Denise can either comment now or possibly comment separately. But I raised at the budget task and finish group the question of whether holdings, skills and experience could be used to look at commercial activities and trading activities within the authority. And it seems to me we've got a unique resource in managing director and finance director who understand more about the way the council works than many do, but also understand commercial aspects. And it would seem to me that was a real potential to look at some of our commercial operations or operations that should be commercial and work out how we could identify ways to move forward quickly. Now, I understand all the reasons why that's been put on hold, but I just feel that is a potential which could sustain Bristol Holdings whilst we identify a way forward and also enable the authority to generate income or more income from sources than it currently does.
So that opportunity was one of the things that was considered in thinking about the appropriate model going forward, given the reduced portfolio of companies that Peter described. But it just wasn't felt that there was likely to be, sufficient need or income generated to sustain the company, and we felt we would be in danger of creating a reason for keeping the company. I think if we need that kind of support, I think we feel it would be better secured on a case-by-case basis, related to exploring commercial opportunities that might present themselves to the council. As you say, Jeff, Stephen Peacock's leading on the commercialisation for the agenda for the council now, and that was part of the consideration in feeling we couldn't continue to justify needing the cost of the company. Whilst the company continues to exist, Peter and Chris are continuing to, when they can, provide that kind of support, but we just didn't feel that we could justify, retaining the company given the other reasons why we don't think it's necessary. Peter, you may want to add about, what you anticipate doing in the short term, but capacity is limited now, isn't it?
And if I just may clarify just one point, Chair, just to say that we don't have a managing director and a finance director. We have a chair and a finance director stroke executive. So we have pruned it down as...
And you thought you were pedantic.
I mean, if I could comment, if we could comment, we are supportive of the approach that the council is taking. At the end of the day, this is a cost benefit. There has to be benefit for the cost, and the cost of running a company with staff is expensive when you've only got two companies, in particular with a company like Gorham that's going to have multiple levels of governance and structure, and it's so different from Bristol Waste. It does make sense, we believe, but we're going to work very hard with the council to make sure that the sorts of gaps that you've touched on in terms of the transition are addressed. Because of course we've got the knowledge to understand, where the gaps are in things that we have brought to the table, and work with the council to make sure that they're not, left behind in any transition, that they're considered.
So, Chair, it's probably beyond the remit of where we are here, but I'm not sure there's any other opportunity to make it, because we don't look at commercial activities. And it's just a plea that if only the expertise that we have could, for example, be used to very briefly look at the disciplines within the trading for schools arrangements to see how those could be applied to other areas of the council's activities. And I believe there are significant contributions that could be made relatively quickly if those could be examined. I understand the advice from officers that can't be, but it's just a plea that whilst we've got access to that expertise, could we not use it to just look and give some advice on what we might be able to achieve?
Okay, Jeff, thank you. And I think that's a good point, but I think I also should point out that I think, as you implied earlier on, no definite decision has yet been made. And if I understand from what you were saying, is the implication was that with just two companies, there probably wouldn't be a cost benefit. And obviously, the Bristol Heat Networks and its relationship with City Leap would be coming to Osm later. But I'm also conscious of the fact that we know what the direction of travel is, but we've also seen other instances where procurement has not gone the way we perhaps wanted to. So I guess what I'm saying here is that I take your point, Jeff, but we also have to be aware that circumstances may change by the time we get to that point. Councillor Wilcox.
Yes, thank you. I've got a question about that key targets for the year table. There's a line talking about the liquidation of B 2020. I'm just wondering how complicated that has got, considering the company that purchased the assets of Bristol Energy has gone bust, and also where this extra £2 million of loss is actually going to be allocated, please.
So probably to answer that question in any depth, we'd need to do that in the exempt session. But at a very high level, the failing of the company in question has not had an impact for various reasons. So that is all part of the consideration. In effect, we've reached such a level now in the journey and maturity of the liquidation that risk reduced and reduced. There was a small risk remaining, and we can explain in a short exempt session how that risk is being mitigated.
And just to jump in again, I understand that it has had no impact on the envelope that was predicted for the losses from Worcester Energy.
So the £2 million figure, so again, it depends how much history and background you got in this, but June 2020, we set out a series of options that were debated by Osm and by Cabinet in terms of our forecast and projections of various options. And we set out an envelope of our forecast estimates with a lot of expertise from industry helping us of what could be achieved if we took the route of sale of the company, as was eventually decided. And an envelope of least worst pain was forecast. And what the £2 million figure is saying is we are on track to do better by 2 million in terms of that projection. But that doesn't mean that 2 million comes back to the council. It's just it means we will, in effect, have reduced the loss by 2 million of where it could have been in our forecast of June of 2020. And if I can just add to that in terms of the length of doing the liquidation, unfortunately, this is even with a small residual entity that's left. It was such a complicated business that there is a long tail. There are still a lot of outstanding transactions that need to be finalised with third parties, and that will take another 12 months. But we're confident it can be delivered within, working with the liquidators, that it can be delivered within 12 months. But that's the length it takes for this kind of organisation to be wound up.
So a follow-up to that, will the Bristol Holding Company still need to exist to April 2023 when you shut it down?
No, I mean the intention would be, in terms of an established holding company, this plan is aiming for the functions to be transferred and the establishment transferred by September, October at the latest. We've factored in assumptions for a full year, but in terms of the costings, but we anticipate that it will be delivered before that. And really, at the end of the day, in terms of those final transactions are all in the hands now of the liquidators. So they will manage that with dialogue directly with the council.
Do we have any more questions? Thank you. That was very useful.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now going to move into exempt session. So Sorry for those who are watching on YouTube.